anything, I'm gonna read this one, I think. So to my right, we have Leonard Lee, who is the head of Accelerator at 500 Global, which everybody knows. So they're standing at the forefront of nurturing tech innovation. Leonard is an instrumental part of empowering early stage founders to scale their technology companies significantly as the head of Accelerator at 500 Global. And his insights into the accelerator world are very invaluable, with an impressive 2.7 billion in assets under management and a history of backing over 5,000 founders. Leonard's leadership is one of the leading VC firms profoundly impacting the tech startup landscape. So round of applause for Leonard. Thanks for being here. And we also have Riddhi, who's an investor at Berkeley SkyDeck Fund. She's an accomplished investor with a diverse background. Her journey, it started from studying politics, philosophy, and economics in the UK to going into a career in public policy, early stage investments in India, and the aerospace industry, and brings a wealth of experience to the table as an avid traveler exploring 26 countries. And all of these experiences have shaped her global perspective as an investor. So one more round of applause. Let's make sure these work. Okay, I think we're good to go. So the way I want to kick things off is as a investor, I get asked a lot of questions about accelerators. And the first answer that I always give is go apply and just see what happens, especially from the earliest stage founders. So just to set the stage, I'd love to start with, as an accelerator, how does your accelerator or fund distinguish itself in a market saturated with programs promising a CalPort startups to success? How are you guys different? What is your specialty, unique factors, and then what makes you better than or different than other, funds?
Yeah, sure. Hey everyone, great to be here today. I don't know if you guys know how SkyDeck's structured, but I can quickly give you a brief understanding of how it's structured, and that helps answer the question. So Berkeley SkyDeck Fund is actually a private fund. We raise money from institutional investors like most funds in the Valley do. But we have the name, and we're called Berkeley SkyDeck, and that's because we donate 50% of the GP's carry to Berkeley. Now, what that does is it incentivizes Berkeley to open up its network and ecosystems to the founders that we invest in. And as a result, our founders get access to Berkeley's larger ecosystem. And that's what makes us a key differentiator to the other programs out in the Valley. What does Berkeley do for global founders? There's various different things. First, it has about 500,000 alum that live and breathe in almost any industry, any company out there. And the pitch to them is super easy. It's, hey, instead of going back and donating dollars to Berkeley, spend 30 minutes with me. And if I win, Berkeley also wins financially. And that almost gets a yes from almost any Berkeley alum out there. So that's a great way founders in our ecosystem can tap into that network. People graduate from Berkeley every year in every industry at every level. So there's a whole host of talent that you can tap into as a founder coming into our ecosystem. SkyDeck runs not only the largest intern fair on campus, where our founders can get access to talent from, but we also partner with Haas, where you have MBAs acting as operators in residence to help you with that one financial template that your investor is asking for you to put in your data room now. Or we have master students from the data engineering program that will be there to help you with a particular thing. Or we have a postdoc to help you with this research problem that you had. So that's another way you can tap into the Berkeley network. The third is that it has the most Nobel laureates in the world. So there's a whole host of really interesting and exciting technology that occurs in campus, and there's a lot of really interesting people leading that. And you have access to these faculty who not only act as advisors, but sometimes are also your fellow founders in the program. And then finally, Berkeley has access to the Valley. And as a result of that, not only do you get access to incredible investors across the ecosystem, but also access to other founders. And, a founding journey can sometimes be super lonely. And by being in this ecosystem of other founders, by being in this in-person program, you also get to bounce off ideas with different founders. So I would say those are 4 pillars that make us different.
That's awesome. And I'll just say off the bat, I mean, there's so many great programs. Obviously, SkyDeck, 500. You guys know YC, Techstars. You can go on and on and on. So all of them are they're going to have slightly different focus areas, and you just have to figure out what that is. And if it actually works with what you're looking for, great, go do it. They're all great programs. There's something for everyone, or most everyone, and so you just have to figure that out. I think a lot of times, for us in particular, we actually try to develop relationships with founders from the very start. So when Daniel, when you were saying, hey, apply early, we see people even at the idea stage and we get to know them. And then we get to actually work with them. We may not accept everyone at the first shot, but we want to see you grow. And that's actually one of the things that helps us get conviction around, all right, this is the right founder to make something huge here. And so we can see them speeding up over time. They're getting new people onto their team. There's so many things that we love to see as you develop that helps us to want to lean in and help you grow. So just a little context on 500, perhaps what makes us a bit different. We were, I think, the 3rd major accelerator developed. So it was YC, Techstars, and then us. So we started in 2010. We now have 33 funds globally. 5,000 founders, 3,000 portfolio companies, over 40 unicorns, some that you might know, so like Canva, Twilio, Talkdesk, Intercom, Grab, on and on and on. So what's nice about that is our alumni are very active and they are very supportive. So we just had one of our unicorn founders come into the office last week and just have a really intimate chat with our current batch. Our batch size is only 20, maybe 30 companies on the high end. So you actually get to know everyone obviously in the batch really well, but our alumni, the investors who came in. We just had a GP from another early stage fund come in this week. We have investors coming in every week. And so they just want, everyone's there to help you figure out the next stages of growth. So for us, it is very much about being present. So a lot of our founders are in Palo Alto for the 4-month program, and then we culminate in a demo day. So all of that is, we spend every day. To be fair, I spend even the weekends with our founders. We're just talking through a lot of what's going on, and we want to make sure that we can help you accelerate, just as the name says, right, from the point you get into the program through demo day and beyond. Many times I still work with a lot of our alumni who are trying to figure out what's the next steps. How do we grow from here? What do I do to fundraise and whatnot? So that's at least a high level overview of 500.
Great. Thank you, guys. So what is the biggest benefit of a program like 500 or, let's say, Berkeley SkyDeck? Because a lot of founders ask me a very binary question, and they say, is it the network? Is it the mentorship? And they're looking for one answer. And I don't have one answer for them because it varies based on the startup. But I'd love to get that one answer from both of you guys specifically for 500 and for Berkeley SkyDeck as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it takes a village, right? And it takes a village, and that's what an accelerator helps with. It gives you a village. Often you're just 1, 2, 3 people building a company, and it just helps open doors in ways that you yourself may not have access to. And I think that's the biggest thing that an accelerator provides. That means a network, that means mentorship, that means all of those things. Just helps expand your horizons in ways that, you only have 24 hours in a day, and there's only so much you can do, and it helps make that larger, is what I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it's network generally, but that incorporates a lot of different facets. I was a founder before I actually went through 500. So it was funny because before I went to 500, I was like, oh, I got this. I know what to do. We had customers, we had revenue. I think we might have had 100K coming in to 500. I can't remember exactly the numbers, but so it's not as though we hadn't built something that people wanted. But what happened was when I went into 500, my eyes opened up. Everyone in the batch is amazing, and they've all figured out slightly different ways to grow their businesses really fast. And so I learned from all of them, and then I was able to exponentially grow from there. And that was, we eventually got to like 2 million ARR pretty quickly, like a year or two after that. And it's one of those things where had I not gone through the program, yes, I probably could have grown. I probably could have grown from like 100K one year to maybe 300K the next year, maybe to 600K the next year. And that's fine, but that's not venture scale, right? To get to venture scale, you need to get to about $200 million in revenue within, call it 7 to 10 years. So it's a really fast trajectory, and you ultimately need as much help as you can to get there. There's absolutely no one who's ever been able to grow that large of a company without other people involved. It doesn't have to be through an accelerator program, but having an accelerator program gives you that network that you might not otherwise have. So that's really the biggest benefit. Obviously, the investor network is tremendously helpful for fundraising and just feedback in general. They get to see the market overall. But honestly, the other founders, the mentors you work with, that's where you're going to start to see a lot of the learnings that you might not have understood, especially in detail, because everything you read on Twitter is not true, right? So it might not actually apply to your business. That's the problem. You might read in blogs or on X or wherever, hey, I should do this, but that might actually apply to what you're trying to build. And so you need the perspective of others who've done this before to help you figure out what is relevant for you and not.
If I can just add, it also gives you community, which is something that we don't talk about enough. But I think that also, beyond just networking opportunities, it just gives you people to fall back on, whether it's your investors on the team or your fellow founders. It's just community that you can trust.
Yeah, that's really, really great advice. What are some things that a founder can do to increase their chances in getting accepted into a program like 500 or Berkeley SkyDeck? What are some green flags that you would consider?
I can start off. Oops. Hopefully we didn't destroy the camera. I will say the number one thing that at least I look for is speed of adaptation. So can you take new information, new data, and change quickly off of it? Or does it take you a long time? I'll give a quick example even from this batch. I met this founder and I asked him, and he would typically have 3 to 5 calls at 6 a.m., starting at 6 a.m. with customers. And then I would talk to him and I asked him, what are the trends you're seeing? What are you learning? And then, so one day he's like, it's really odd. Like, I'm getting a lot of customers who want a WhatsApp integration. So I said, okay, great. How long would that take you to build? It's like, well, probably 3 days. And mind you, it was him and one other person on this team at the time. And so he's like, okay, great, 3 days, let's go try it out. So he comes back to me the next day, he's already integrated it. He's built it and integrated it, and he's already seeing customers react to it. And so it's just super fast, right? Like the speed of shipping, the speed of learning, all of that plays into success. Because the one thing you have an advantage over every other incumbent is speed. There's no way a Google can even get a meeting on the calendar within a week, let alone make a decision. There's no way even OpenAI can't move that quickly, right? Because there's just so many people now that are involved in decisions. So you can move much faster. You can find the nuances in the market before anyone else can. And then once you get there, then you expand and scale really quickly. But you have to move quickly. If it takes you too long to figure that out, guaranteed the incumbents or someone else will figure it out before you.
Great.
I can walk through stages of our application and what we may look at every stage. So with the application, when you first submit it, first boils down to, is this a big enough market? The way venture works is that if it's not a big enough market, then there's no point putting in money in the first go. So bottom line, fundamental, it has to be a venture business, has to be a big enough market. Beyond that, is it an interesting team? Is it an interesting problem that they're working on? Simply, do we want to learn more? And if the answer to that is yes, then you get invited to a first round interview where we'll meet, maybe the CEO and this, maybe a co-founder, maybe it's just a CEO for about 20 minutes, where we'll just see if the team has any interesting insight on what they're building for that we didn't think about or we didn't know existed, right? What is that drives this team to be building for whatever they're building for. And if we see that, a lot of that is in the speed that we move. It's in the insights that they've given us in the interview. We get excited, and then we have, a few rounds of back and forth, maybe on email, maybe we'll get on a few calls with you, try and understand your product better. And that's when we go into a deeper second round interview, which is about 50 minutes. You probably bring the rest of your team on that. We get to know other members of your team. And I think that's when the tables turn a little bit, and it becomes, how can SkyDeck help you? And all those things that we spoke about. How can our network help you? How can our community help you? So that you grow at the rate that we were talking about growing at, so that you are successful in raising that seed round at the end of SkyDeck. At that point, we've looked at about 2,200 companies. We're interviewing about 50. They're all great. There's very little difference between company number 20 and 21. Unfortunately, that's just how many we can invest in. So the tables kind of turn at the end, and it becomes, how can we help you the most? And if you can help us get an answer to that, I think that helps your chances as well.
It's really interesting. I'm a big fan of trying to extract hard pills to swallow for founders. So going on what you said and what Leonard said, especially and with speed of execution, does that imply that you should have a technical co-founder if you're building a technical product? And then what is that ideal founding team? And is a solo founder okay? Or how is that perceived when applying?
Yeah, so I'll say that as a business founder, or let's say a business founding team, if you have a technical product, you need a technical co-founder. I'll just say it, right?
Thank you.
I mean, everyone's like, oh, but I can hire someone. I know this dev shop in some offshore. It'll be really cheap, et cetera, et cetera. Guess what? They're not going to move as fast as having someone on the team who can actually build it there. So, going back to speed, that's your lifeline. You don't have, the one thing you can't get more of is time as a founder. And so if you can't build that product and you can't adapt to what your customers are asking for, and you can't change quickly, you're just going to be going down a slower path, which ultimately just makes it harder to fundraise. This is true of anyone. So if it takes you a year, let's say, to get to 100K AR, and another team gets there in 6 months, who's the investor probably going to back? It's going to be the team that obviously moves a lot faster. And so that's one. Two, I will say, going to your solo founder point, one of the things that we look at very specifically is, what's your ability to actually recruit the best people you know? Not recruit an intern from school, but actually recruit the most brilliant developers you know, the most brilliant marketers or salespeople you know, to join a startup before you have the capital to actually pay them market rates. If they actually can come on board because they believe your vision, they think you're an amazing leader, they love what you're doing, and they're excited about that, that's a huge signal. And very few people, a lot of people are afraid to do that. They're like, oh, once I raise, then I'll bring on that team. And it's like, no. If I had $5 million, sure, I can pay people $700,000 or whatever the going rate is for an ML engineer. That's not the point. Yes, almost anyone can do that. It's the fact that people believe in you. You've worked with them before. You're highly spoken of in that space that you're building. Whatever it is, people are drawn to you, and that's going to speak more volume than whatever. So that's my perspective. Can you build a great business as a solo founder? Of course you can. It's just a harder road. So just know that going in, and especially if you're not a technical solo founder, the road is that much harder.
Echo both those points.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So another question that I get asked often is, just to give an example of a company that's a long shot company that you took a risk on, whether at 500 or at Berkeley SkyDeck, and what those intangible characteristics of that company were. So let's say it did not necessarily fit your criteria, and then how did that turn out? And then I want to segue into whether there's any kind of industry bias for accelerators or incubators, and if a founder should be trying to position their company towards some of those biases. Let's say AI is really hot right now.
So this company fits our thesis. I wouldn't say it's outside of our thesis, but an example of, I guess, the moonshots that we look for. It's a company called Loom, two Argentinian PhD founders. What they do is they use laser frequency for satellites to be able to communicate with Earth, as opposed to radio frequency, which is what the norm is. As two Argentinian PhD founders, it's difficult to raise money here in the Valley with just a PowerPoint presentation and some technology built, because they don't understand the context of what it means to invest in Argentinian founders. On the flip side, they can raise money in Argentina as Argentinian founders, but there's not enough risk appetite to invest in a PowerPoint presentation about satellites communicating with Earth with laser frequency, right? And that's what SkyDeck does. SkyDeck helps bridge that gap, where we give them all the network, the expertise, the business understanding to help make them a Delaware C Corp, contextualize what it means to do business here, open those networks for them, so that their risk is mitigated on both ends. Now, they're American investors that are excited about moonshot ideas, are okay investing in an Argentinian company because they have that understanding of what it means to do business here in the US. And then on the flip side, Argentinian investors are open to it because they have the validation of the Valley. So it's a typical example of what SkyDeck can do for a global founder that's really building, crazy ideas out there.
And I love that. We, for some of you who may not know, 500 actually used to be called 500 Startups when we were first started. And then we rebranded 2 years ago now to 500 Global. We have 33 funds globally in emerging markets in all different areas. So Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, you have Africa, MENA, Europe, LATAM, and then obviously North America. So from that standpoint, one of the biases has always been, can you find founders in other regions of the world? I'm curious, how many people are not from the Bay Area? Okay, so we have a fair number of people. I'm actually curious, different countries, just shout them out. France. Germany. New Zealand. Oh, nice. Very cool. What was that? Argentina. Okay, very cool. Seattle, yeah. Jamaica. Oh, very cool. That's great. Great. And so one of the theses that we've had from day one has always been that talent exists everywhere. Capital does not. And so we exist to fill that gap. That's why we have local investors all over the world. We've invested in companies in 80 different countries. So, we can go down the list, but like Canva is, Melanie Perkins is from Australia. That's not a region that a lot of VCs here would ever invest in. They would never even take a meeting because they're like, oh, you're not from the Valley. Oh, you don't really understand how it works here. You probably can't build quickly enough. You can't do X, Y, and Z. And so we've stripped that away and we said, look, at the base of it, if someone's really sharp, they understand what they're building for, they have the prerequisite attributes to be a great founder, we'll help you figure out all the other things that you may not have access to just because you live somewhere else. Like that should not be the barrier. And so very fundamentally at our core, that's what we do. And so you go down the list, like Tiago from TalkDesk, he was in batch 3, came from, I believe, Portugal. Here, right, and then built a fairly large company. So you just all over the board, we've had that story, and so that's fundamentally why we exist to support people, right? Like there's plenty of firms here that will support you if you are Stanford, you've been in the Bay your entire life, if you've done whatever, right? Like that's a very typical profile. And that's easy for an investor to invest in, right? But we know that there's such great talent everywhere, and that's why we want to uncover that, and we want to help you guys figure that out.
That's personally why I am a huge fan of 500. I think there's a huge advantage personally in that immigrants and first generation founders have. I'm curious to get both of your thoughts on that. Is there an edge of some sort, some unique characteristic that either immigrant or first generation founders have that those that just grew up in the States do not?
Drive, hustle in a lot of ways. You're here to prove a point, and you just have to. You don't have the backing from this ecosystem that believes that this is a valid career path. You're probably fighting 100 battles back at home, and you're still out there to go and do this and pushing yourself. And I think that's the biggest thing. It helps bring speed. It helps bring passion. It helps bring all those lovely things we like in a founding team, I would say. Yeah.
So this is going to be a challenging question, but those are the fun ones. So you guys are both used to having founders pitch you ideas. But I'd love to get an idea of what is something that if a founder in this room pitched you today, you would just love funding it, whether it's not being built yet or, something you wish was being built today, that you would just throw money at it immediately.
This is changing now.
First of all,
The pivots are coming.
yeah, that would never happen. But let me think about that one. Hold on. There's nothing fundamentally just on the idea, right? Because there's a lot of areas that I absolutely love, but if the team background is not there, I would never invest in it, right? We would never invest in it. So, the areas that I'll at least say the areas that we're super excited about, AI is, I think, not overblown. It's become pretty standard that back in the 2000s, let's say, when you would say, "Oh, we're a SaaS company," maybe in the early 2000s that was novel and new, but now many B2B companies are SaaS companies, right? So it's not it's not what differentiates you. And AI ultimately is the same way. So it's not that AI will differentiate you. It actually is just table stakes for playing the game. But there is the next generation of AI, which I think is really exciting. But that, to be honest, our founders are on the leading edge of research, and they're understanding what's happening faster than anyone else can keep up with it. And so we just naturally get excited when we start to see something vastly different. We can make another AI app, great, especially on a consumer app. We can make another, you name it, right? There's just a plethora of different ideas out there. But when your vision is big enough, they're like, fundamentally at its core, we need to change AI or whatever it is, whatever industry you're attacking in a very different way. That gets exciting because you're like, oh, I've not seen that before. Oh yeah, that definitely makes sense given sort of the trends and whatever else. So I don't have one idea per se, but there's a lot of different areas that would get me excited. Sure.
Yeah, again, don't have one idea per se, and this is probably not like a SkyDeck thing, but more of a me thing. But I grew up in manufacturing factory floors. My parents have a garment factory. Also worked in the aerospace industry, where one of my parts actually made it to the moon. But while manufacturing that part, we used root cards that were physical papers that traveled across the factory floor. So any technology that helps make manufacturing better always excites me personally, because that's just been my bias. But I don't think I have a specific answer to that question.
Well, when you figure that out, let me know.
Maybe I started.
Yeah. So I think I want to just scan the room really quick. How many of you in here are first-time founders? Raise a hand. So I would say maybe a third. What about second-time founders? So about half the room, first or second-time founders. So one thing that I hear often from let's say more experienced founders on their third, fourth, fifth companies, they have an exit, is they ask me kind of what would I get out of the accelerator at this stage? Sometimes they're even self-funding their company pre-seed to seed. And unfortunately, accelerators do fall into this similar paradigm that dating apps do. If you guys crush it, you may never see that founder ever again because you've imparted everything you know, and they're a rock star. They're Elon Musk, or whatever at that point. How do you attract those founders that, let's say, have some experience now, but there are still ways that they can benefit from an early stage fund or a program, et cetera?
I think more experienced founders know exactly what they don't know. And that's what they come to an accelerator for, to build and bridge those gaps. So, if there's an ecosystem that you want to tap into or a network that you don't have, I think sometimes it's more pointed, in fact, because you know exactly what kind of help you want, and then we can help Rally give you that. So they're more directed in what they don't know, and we can help with that.
Yeah, we have a number of repeat founders that go through 500. I'll give an example. There's one that we just funded. It's their third company. They've exited the last two to like Google, and I can't remember who else, for a decent amount. I think it was like 8-figure exits. And ultimately, every time, they understand the process. They know what we can deliver for them and how we can help them. So it's not just like, hey, here's a demo day, go fundraise, right? We help them through the process. They might have new team members a lot of times. That does happen. We actually had a unicorn founder come back in, and their co-founder, it was their first time sort of building a company. So they wanted them to kind of get that experience, the rest of the team. So there was a bit where, we've had, probably each year, at least a handful of repeat founders who've gone through 500 before come back. And many of them also, to be fair, refer in new companies. They're like, oh, I love this founder. So that's always a great way to get noticed a bit, is if you have someone signal a bit. Like we try, obviously, everyone has to apply through the accelerator, through the online form, just so we can try to maintain some equity across all the applications. But obviously, if someone knows you that we've worked with before, that can obviously help us a bit. So.
Also, just to add, going back to accelerators are there for community and network. Sometimes it's less about that, product workshop that you have happening, and more about the fact that I have a meeting with Dan, and Dan just told me he's really interested in, ABC, and suddenly you walk past the room and you're doing ABC, and I can be like, hey, come meet Dan right now. And just being in that community of an accelerator where there's people flooding through the doors at every point just helps. So it's, it's less about those workshops and more going back to the network and the community that it provides.
And this next question is kind of for my own benefit, because the three of us are going to get pitched probably 50 times after this. What is the perfect elevator pitch? What elements does it have? And then how can a founder make it really short but still intriguing to, let's say, a fund like SkyDeck or Accelerator like 500?
Concise, specific, and differentiated. So almost invariably, I get pitched a lot where it's, I don't even know what you do. Oh, this is taking 5 minutes to explain, and I still have no clue. And then at the end of the day, if I feel like everyone believes that, and I did too, that their company is the only company doing this, but ultimately we also get pitched similar companies to you. It may not be the same exact, which is why we need you to do the homework to understand what is the difference between the 5 or 10 other companies that are trying to build a similar thing. So that's helpful.
That was concise and specific and unique. Yeah.
So one thing I'm personally very curious about is what is the evolution of the accelerator, the incubator, the early stage fund. Seems like they've changed, to a degree every 5 to 7 years in some meaningful way. Where are they going to look like in the next 5 to 7 years? And is AI going to replace them?
I tried actually, guaranteed we did this with an intern, but I tried pulling out all our data of who we've invested in, what the scores look like at the application, to see if we could run any patterns. And our jobs are safe for now. But in terms of what they look like, it's interesting because maybe because of the way the industry is, everyone wants to be investing earlier right now. It could just be because of the market. So in some ways, everyone's trying to play in that pre-seed, seed game. You're always trying to go one step earlier. So funds are also now talking about the hiring that they can provide and the network that they can provide and, the access to mentorship or whatever that looks like. So in some ways, people are all building their ecosystems and their accelerators, even if you don't call it that. But yeah.
I mean, there's probably an aspect where I don't know, is anyone here an investor or been at a firm or accelerator? Okay. So you might know some of this already. What's probably changed over the past, we'll call it decade or so. I think back in 2010, there was only about 70 seed funds. And now there's well over 1,000. There's probably over 2,000 at this point. We just sort of lost track. There's been a proliferation. And ultimately, what's happened on the fund side is that in order to raise LP money, limited partner capital, you've actually had to specialize even more and more. So there aren't a lot of new generalist funds that are being developed unless you have a really strong track record as an investor already. So maybe you come from A16Z, Lightspeed, Sequoia, whatever it is, and then you can probably create a generalist fund at that point. But for any new emerging manager, there has to be a very clear point of differentiation that makes you special. And so much like you were saying, all these funds are developing accelerators. But ultimately, that's just how are we going to help you? We're calling it accelerator, but how are we ultimately going to help you? And so the help is going to get more specific, likely, as we keep moving on, to the point where you can find that very specific niche that you want for whatever you're building, or maybe your background, whatever it is that could be extremely helpful. So I see that happening. Unless the dynamic changes where, this will definitely change. Obviously, when interest rates come down, that'll drive a lot of what's been sort of blocking the fund side. So fundraising has been very difficult. Just like it has been difficult for founders, it's been difficult for funds to fundraise from LPs. Interest rates come down, you obviously unlock the public markets, IPOs, exits happen. Guess what? With exits, you get DPI as a fund, which is the distributions you give back to your LPs. LPs now have funds to go and invest in new funds, right? So it's all intertwined. So there'll be a point where the larger funds don't have to play at the pre-seed stage anymore, that they can now put their capital towards the bigger bets because they can actually see an exit for that bigger bet. But they are playing early right now. Like I've seen some funds, they do exploratory checks. You find an AI researcher who's the best researcher in that field, they'll just give $100,000 even if they haven't started a company. But it's because they're the top 0.1% of whatever they're doing. And so that ultimately, I think is probably one of the bigger shifts that will happen. So it'll go in waves a bit, but I see specialization happening much more rapidly now.
That's very interesting. Do you have something?
That was it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I have one more question. What is a myth or misconception about incubators or accelerators that if you can just bust that myth today, here and there, put it on record, put it on camera, what would it be? Because I have a couple of ideas, but I want to hear them from you.
On the top of my head, jumping through many of them and just continuing to raise safes and just just cruising through different accelerators is probably not, I would say, the best way to build a company. But that's one on the top of my head.
That fundraising will solve your problems. Invariably, everyone comes to us and like, oh, we could just fundraise. If I could just get $1 million or $2 million or $5 million, I can solve X, Y, and Z. And that's not the solution there. So you have a question?
One One thing I've had a little trouble figuring out, I thought you might be able to shed some light on. How many of the startups that have gone through your accelerators have hit 100 million in annual revenue?
So for us, at least the 40 unicorns, right? I'm trying to think of the other ones that are probably. Sorry, and no, I take that back because not all the unicorns have obviously reached that. They've obviously reached the valuation, right, to get to $1 billion. To get to $100 million, those are the ones that are IPO'd. I think for us, we have 8 IPOs at least. So that's, I haven't tracked the IPOs specifically, but I know it's somewhere in that range. So obviously to get to that stage, right, takes a lot of effort and work. That's generally at least 10 years. We've been around for 13 years. So early days, we only did 20 companies-ish a batch, 20, 30 companies. So what you'll see is most of the times, in order to reach that $100, $200 million mark, you're going to have been a fund probably for 15, 20 years at this point for that to actually start to materialize. Obviously, there's breakouts, right, that obviously can happen as well. So.
I want to flip that question and ask, what is the smallest company that you've taken on?
Smallest in what sense?
Well, revenue at the time that you take.
Oh, yeah. I mean, idea. Like, we've taken companies at the idea stage, like nothing then other than a deck, right? Again, you have to be highly differentiated, right? It's not another dating app, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
Can you please continue your thread of thought where you were saying fundraising is not going to solve your problem? I want to hear more about that.
Do you want to talk about it? I can talk about it later.
Either way.
Go ahead. You can say.
Well, fundraising is not the result of a good business. I mean, fundraising doesn't define a good business. It's a result of a good business. So I think you still need the fundamentals of a business to solve any problems that you have. And once you have a good business in place, then the dollars will come in eventually and you'll attract them. So I don't know if that was where you were going, but I would say that's the crux of it. Once you build a good business, you will get funded. You don't have a good business because you've been funded.
Right, exactly. And so there's this mentality shift that happens with certain founders, or maybe it's a difference in mentality, I should say. There are founders who are very dedicated to just building the best business they can. And they're just taking whatever resources they have right now to make the most of it, right? Investors will recognize the effort even with little resources. So if you're only a 2-person team, you have no capital, but you've built like a really solid product, you get some early customer signals or validation, that's great, right? That's fantastic. On the flip side, we've had founders who've raised $5 million and they're still pivoting. They're still trying to figure out what do customers want. They haven't quite figured it out. They probably, because they raised $5 million, and this happened a lot in 21, they probably scaled before they actually had product market fit. And so they've hired salespeople now. They've hired this whole like marketing team. And I don't know fundamentally that they actually have a product that people absolutely need. And so this is why if you come with the mindset that, hey, I just need to raise a ton of money first, and then I'll go build this company or this product, you're just setting yourself up for failure. Like, again, my personal opinion, having more capital does not solve your issues. So that fundamentally is what I believe.
You also need to burn that capital in an efficient way faster. So the more money you raise, the more responsibility you have to spend that money in an efficient way so that you can hit that next goal to raise the next round. So it is this circle that you have to be careful about.
And also, really, I mean, it's like you are on a clock. The minute you start raising 7 figures or more, the investors are like, hey, when are you going to be able to hit those next set of milestones? And invariably, I've had, going back to the repeat founder question, I have so many friends that have built successful businesses before, and they're like, I'm not going to raise $1 until I've actually figured out a real product that people want. Because the minute I start fundraising, the clock starts and you just got to go, 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 go. And the expectations are you're going to grow really fast, right? We're going back to the whole, we need to IPO. And going back to maybe the gentleman's question in the back, why do we care about getting to an IPO? It's power law. Many of you, I don't know if anyone here knows power law, but power law essentially is we will make essentially 95% of our profits are carry, what we deliver to our LPs, what we make individually, from maybe 5 to 10% of the companies we invest in. And so it is very difficult, obviously, to get to $200 million in revenue. But if you are big enough and you can actually make it to that stage of growth, that's what we're ultimately placing the bet on, right? And so we need to get there for this to all work.
So what can a founder do without money that's productive today, for example, instead of fundraising and taking up most of their time pitching investors?
Go speak to your customers and see what they want and build that, and start building the business, start getting customers on board. And I think that's the best thing to do with your time. Speak to your customers.
Yeah, build and iterate, right? Like it's why I go back to having a co-founder that is technical, that can actually build the MVP. You need that in order to even start to get in front of customers. And to be fair, you don't need a product to get in front of customers. You can obviously just go talk to them, especially if you're enterprise SaaS. God, we were enterprise SaaS. We didn't have the product, and we sold it before we actually had the product, and we just built it afterwards, right? So it's one of those things where you need that. You need to demonstrate that you can actually talk to customers. And so many people are just hesitant for whatever reason to talk to customers. Like, oh, I need to really, maybe I actually need to build the actual product, and they'll take 6 months. And then when they build it, they actually talk to customers and no one wants it. They're like, why didn't they want it? Like, I want it, but they can't quite get over it.
So 500 and SkyDeck both have some really successful alumni companies. What did those companies do differently than everyone else that went through the program that shot them to the stratosphere in that way?
I guess there's a good balance between going at it and then also timing of the market. Sometimes when those things align, that's what happens. So I think, for every company that's been successful right now has probably died 4 times before they're at this stage today. And they just had that drive to go at it and then listen to what the market's saying and work with that, whether that meant, slight pivots in direction or just pushing. I think it's that drive, and that. And then when the stars align, great things happen, but you keep going at it till that happens, in my opinion.
A lot of them are forces of nature. They don't really listen to the noise around them. So as a founder, you guys probably hear a lot of comments about what you're building, a lot of opinions. Everyone has advice. You could probably go walk outside and get 10 bits of advice if you just start pitching, right? And ultimately, the best founders know what is right and what's wrong, right? Like they block out 95% of the noise that they're hearing. And so they just are super focused on, okay, this is what we need to do. This is how we're going to get there. We'll figure this out. I want to listen to X, Y, and Z, but ultimately they just go. And they are not afraid at all to make really big decisions, even when they are a unicorn or much larger. They might need to make a big pivot because the market has changed. Most people would be like, well, we got to unicorn by doing X. And like, no. Well, the markets are different now, right? And so they have to be able to be as nimble and quick as they were day one, even when they're much larger companies.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Please, Fred.
So I just wanted to ask you, what sort of support systems do you have in place for your entrepreneurs who are having a tough time, whether that's professionally or personally?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the areas that we focus on is going back to your questions about the trends in accelerators. A lot of them have focused on growth hacks, right? That's really fundamentally what they've focused on. And we focus a lot on product market fit and growth. But the third leg of our curriculum is really about building the best founders for building that company. And so what we do is we actually have founder coaches. So these are people who've actually built successful businesses, typically at Series B or beyond, that come back and actually help you work through the other aspects that no one ever talks about. So I'll just tell you, even this week, I had many conversations with our founders where they're like, I am getting stuck because I'm a perfectionist. I was always really good at getting A+, 100% on everything, and I can't get away from that mentality here. And so I know I need to move much faster. How do I do it? Right. And that is a much deeper conversation that you can't really read about. You have to actually talk through with someone who's been there before. So there's a lot of self-discovery that happens in our program to really understand what are you really strong at and what are the areas that you need help on. Everyone needs help on something. I still need help in a lot of areas. And so if you can't identify what those areas are, you just can't grow as a founder. It's just really hard.
Yeah, similar. We don't have coaches, but we do these sessions with our alumni founders. They're called Lunch and Learn series. Or sometimes we'll even take you to their offices where, like I said, some of our successful companies, they've died 3-4 times before where they are right now. And we'll go through those stories where, go through old messages where you had a message saying, hey, if I don't raise tomorrow, I'm over. And we talk through, what did you feel at that point? How do you overcome that? So all closed room discussions with some of our successful founders. And then the second thing we do is, because we're an in-person program, I think our founders just end up becoming really close to each other. So that, and on one level, it's learning from people who've been there. And then on the other, it's just being around people that are currently in your shoes, feeling all those same things. So you've had 10 investors say no to you. Your friend sitting right next to you has had 15 say no to them, and you can kind of bounce off each other as well. So those are 2 things that I think we do well.
Yeah. Let's start here. Yep.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Nikolai Williamson. I'm currently working on a startup to help international high schoolers figure out where they want to spend the next 4+ years of their lives abroad at a university. And my question is, how does someone get into VC, get into investing? Not so on the path where you want to enter as a founder, but more so like, how does somebody work at 500 or work at something like Accelerator, or start an accelerator of their own?
I mean, I was a founder through, I'll just say my experience. There's so many different paths, but I was a founder through 500. So I just knew the partners there. That's how I sort of came in. So I think there's a number of investors there that if you're a founder that they've worked with, obviously you just build a lot more trust. I'll just say blanket, if anyone's looking to become an investor, is not as rosy as people make it out to be, right? So don't think like, oh my God, I get to go fly off on a private jet somewhere, right? Like, I'm still driving a very beat up old car, right? So, so that's one. But 2, trust is such an important commodity in VC, and that even goes with the founder investor relationship. Trust is critical. So when a founder overstates what they actually have. So we get this a lot. Founder says, oh, we have $1 million in revenue, but then we actually are like, oh, is that revenue or GMV? And they're like, oh, it's actually GMV. Okay, great. What's your take rate? I don't know, 5%. Like, okay, that's a completely different business than I thought you were. You're a different stage. And so that trust is broken. And so in the same way, that's why investors want to build trust with certain individuals over time to get to know them and say like, okay, I know you're the type of person that I want to work with that has a keen understanding of the markets. You have great rapport with founders. You have access to founders that most other people don't. There's a whole slew of criteria that I think people look for, but ultimately you need to build those relationships. That's really the best way to get into VC, or at least the way that I've seen work the best. Previous founder that's been successful, very helpful, but definitely like early stage experience in some way. We don't get as many. I mean, there's probably some folks who come from more traditional like banking, PE backgrounds or whatever, right? But I'd say in Silicon Valley, it's more operators now. New York has been more so like the more traditional finance backgrounds. And you see that also in your discussions with them as a founder, right? They evaluate you very differently.
Yeah, I was an operator too before, but I would say if you want to get into it, just work with early stage founders. It's the best way to do it. Advise a couple of people, build that network, and then invest in them maybe, and then build from there. Yeah.
Yeah, we had another question here. Do you still have that? Yep. Sure.
So first of all, thank you for the discussion, really. I always say the power of network grows exponentially with the number of nodes. And I just made an introduction to a friend a couple of months ago, and they got acquired by a company 1 month ago. So I strongly believe in a network of founders. So thanks for doubling down on that. I also want to give a shout out to 500 Global because I spent about 3 months and a half between Dubai and Riyadh last year. And your presence there, it's really impressive. Like Y Combinator and Techstars are not even close to what 500 Global has. But I do have a question. So as a startup accelerator, you of course take equity in the company, and that equity is substantial to the point of almost being, I'm not a co-founder, but almost close to that. So how do the Berkeley, SkyDeck, and 500 Global help founders after the accelerator ends?
Yeah, I mean, we're investors in your cap tables. You can't get rid of us that quickly. I would say once they graduate the program, it's less me pinging you every 2 weeks saying, hey, don't know what's changed in the last 2 weeks, and more the opposite. Every time you would ping me, I'm there for a meeting. So the cadence of me being proactive and speaking to you kind of changes. But anytime they need an introduction to anywhere, if it's a particular company or whatever, they'll reach out. I think the biggest is fundraising. As they're going on to raise their A's or their B's or their C's, they kind of come back to us and see who we know in our network to make those introductions. So as they become bigger, I think it tails off from general networking introductions to more fundraising. But yeah, talking about the equity piece, I don't think if you talk to any SkyDeck founder, they said they give us 7.5% for the 200K. The 200K is just cherry on the top to what the general ecosystem is. Yeah.
Every company that I work with, or that I specifically will bring into the accelerator, I tell them, use me as a co-founder. So I'm going to work, in the areas that I can help you in. Not only during the program, but afterwards, right? And that means my life is kind of crazy because we have a lot of companies after the program that graduate, and we try to help them as much as we can. Even when things aren't great, there's a lot of investors who will start to ignore you, like if you're just not figuring things out, if you're not growing, et cetera, et cetera. But that's when you need the help the most. And so I want to try to help. Obviously, we are time constrained at the end of the day. So the people who reach out and who actually are local and come by the office, whatever it is, right? I'll make time for you, right? It's hard if we'll see some folks where they'll come back when they're fundraising, but they're like, oh, we have 2 months left of runway. We're like, okay, we probably should have talked at least 6 months ago, if not a year ago, because it's hard to help and or change at that point. But for the companies I work with very specifically, I try to get to the point where it's easy to just talk all the time. We text, we'll just randomly call, even at midnight on a Friday, you just chat, right? And so there's nothing wrong. They can call me whenever they want. So that's it.
And then just to add, not just with companies, but nature of our business is there's going to be some failed companies. So just founders as a whole. If you're an alumni founder, we also work with pairing them with existing companies that are successful. So a lot of our alumni that built companies that didn't succeed, unfortunately, have now gone on to join other SkyDeck companies. So you still, going back to, it's a community that you can trust, whether it's good or bad. It's a place that people come back to, whether they're successful or not.
And really quickly, I guess, we do have a platform where founders, alumni specifically, can get access to fundraising help. So if they want intros into specific investors, they can request intros through our platform. If they want to talk to mentors about specific areas of growth or whatever it is that they haven't been able to address before, they can go reach out to those mentors through that. Obviously get connected with other alumni or anything else that might be helpful for them after the fact. So there's obviously the personal touch as a community, which is a huge aspect. I'm still friends with a good chunk of our batch. I talk to them, at least every couple days, someone in our batch. And I think one of them actually has an office here, so I'll probably just go visit him because he's in the office right now. So, it's one of those things where you can't get that. It's very hard to find that community elsewhere, right? Because you're all going through at the same time. We have probably a handful of the companies in our batch are really successful. And so like, we all just rally around them. We try to help them wherever we can. So.
Thank you very much, by the way, for these great insights. I love it. I just arrived to the Valley. I'm from France, from Bordeaux, the world capital of wine. So we know how to make wine there. I have a question because, like, I'm the CEO of a deep tech startup in healthcare. So we prevent blindness due to AMD, and I can't find so many deep tech startups here in my space. And I don't know, like, how do you position yourselves as incubators, accelerators, but also from the investor point of view around these deep tech startups, because it's a very specific space, and I always feel like an alien because I'm always the only deep tech startup around, and I'm just looking, like, for example, lately for deep tech events here in the Valley, I couldn't find. So, like, what's going on?
Yeah, I'll say really quickly, I feel like an alien. I think one of the beautiful parts of the Bay Area or SF is that founders, this is probably the only place I've actually felt comfortable, because I know that everyone is so driven and they have very different ideas about how things should work, right? And so don't feel like an alien. I know that might be, maybe that's the case in France, but that's the beauty of being here is everyone is like you more than you think, right? So that's one. Two, I don't know that I counsel our founders to go and just directly reach out to the founders that they want to meet. The people you probably want to meet aren't necessarily going to be at an event, like especially like I don't know, like a party or something, like, that's pretty rare. So the people you probably want to meet, you just need to go and talk to them, meaning like go find an intro into them. You can potentially reach out to them cold, whatever it is, right? So there's an ethos in the Valley where people try to help each other as much as possible. Obviously, you have to prove that you're serious, that there's something that you're really building here that people want, et cetera, et cetera. But if you can demonstrate that, people are definitely willing to help where they can. So a lot of times, a founder will come to me like, hey, I really need help with X. And I'll go to some of our later stage founders and I'll just say, hey, this founder, they're early, they're pre-seed, but they really have this specific problem that I know you can address. And that founder is willing to give them time. Like, even though they're incredibly busy, they'll do it because they had other people that also poured into them when they were at that same stage. So that is very doable. So I would try a different approach for reaching the people that you really, really want to meet in deep tech, specifically in healthcare. It sounded like I didn't quite get what you did, but that's probably the better approach that at least I counsel people on.
I think we're just about out of time. So let's give a round of applause to our panelists. And feel free to come talk to us afterward.
So we're starting to pitch competitions both media and for a little bit longer.
Thank you so much, everybody. We've been such an amazing and engaged audience. Right now, we're going to have the pitch competition. Before we will start, let's show by raising the hands who learned something new about